Hey, what's up, everybody? Zeal Brothers here once again, and want to make a video about the crisis of confidence. There's a crisis of confidence, and the crisis is in the profession that we know of as pastors. Um, and I think this is a problem with the modern church. A lot of pastors lack confidence, and it's become an issue that I've noticed. I've noticed it in groups of pastors that I've been among. I've noticed it when I've gone and seen other preachers. I've noticed it when I watch sermons online. There's a big, stark difference between a pastor who has confidence and a pastor who doesn't. And there is a big problem with a pastor who doesn't have confidence, because a pastor who doesn't have confidence sounds like he lacks conviction, because he does. And here's the thing. Confidence is directly related to faith. Your confidence in what you are saying to the audience feels like faith that what you're saying is true. And your faith that what you're saying is true will lead to a conviction in your audience that the things that you are proving are true actually are true, and that you follow it and that you believe it. Now, there's a reason, and there's our four things that I've noticed about this crisis of confidence. The first one is this overemphasis on humility and shame, right? There are a lot of pastors who are pushing the idea of humility. And here's the thing. I am not one that's opposed to the principle of humility as a character trait. Humility is a good character trait. But the problem is that when you overemphasize humility, you get to the point where some pastors are literally up there degrading themselves before their audience, pointing out all their faults, pointing out all their insecurities. And I hate to say it, pastors, but you may feel good about talking about that stuff, but nobody wants to hear it from you. They don't want to hear their pastors talking like that. So when you have a crisis of confidence up there, right, you're sitting up there talking about all your faults and all your flaws. You have to be careful how you state that, because to a lot of people, that just feels like you are weak. And so when they hear you talk about all your struggles, sometimes the sermon becomes about you, and that's another problem. But the other problem is that it strikes them as, man, he ain't got through this yet. He's at a low level. He's not strong as I thought he was. And for a lot of you, you do lack confidence. You have a sense of shame, right? You are struggling. You are adrift, and you need some confidence. And confidence is very important for you. You need it. If you don't have confidence, you're not going to be able to stay in this pastoral profession. So your churches, I know a lot of you guys who watch these videos are not pastors. And the thing about it is, what you need to do is you need to encourage your pastor to be strong and be confident. One of the biggest things that you'll see in the letters of Timothy, right, 1st and 2nd Timothy, is that Paul is constantly challenging Timothy to be bold, to be strong, to be confident. And it's just one of those understated points that pastors don't push enough. There's a lot talked about servant leadership. And I get it, but the truth of the matter is that we need leadership. We need somebody who's going to say, get in line, get behind me, or leave. There needs to be some kind of confidence to say, this, thus saith the Lord. There needs to be some confidence to say, I rebuke you in the name of God. You are in sin. You are doing wrong. This is right. This is wrong. This is the word of God. This is the law of God. Somebody needs to be able to say those statements with confidence and with conviction and actually mean it, not make it an act, right? There are sometimes when people will try to be bold as an act. Don't do it as an act. Do it out of conviction in your heart. And that is harder, because that takes a training of your mind to get to that state, and that's hard. But the truth of the matter is that hard things are worth it. Easy things are not worth it. If you get something easy, what good was it? What value was it? It's things that are hard to get that show that they're worth it, right? Expensive things. Here's another reason that there's a crisis of confidence is mask, right? You go to church, you wear a mask. Let me tell you, you're hurting your pastor. And I know you don't want to hear that. And you might say, how are you hurting your pastor? Well, here's the thing. When you up there preaching, a lot of times you gain confidence when you look at the faces of your people. You're saying something and you look at the people. And I know you guys, maybe it's hard to picture this. So let me just give some analogies of how it feels when you're up there. But when you are up there, you feel a connection with your audience, and you look in their eyes and you look at their faces, and you're constantly tracking whether they're getting what you're saying. And you're looking at their faces, and I know maybe we shouldn't be looking at your faces for validation, but it is a good track to see if what we're saying is being understood. And a lot of times when you're up there, you want to get a feeling from the audience to see where they are. Because for some of us, we'll change what we're saying or how we are explaining it, depending on what feedback we get from the audience's faces. When you get a mask, your insecurities get worse. Because you don't know what people are thinking. You don't know what they're saying. That would be as if everybody in the whole sermon in the whole church had their eyes closed and looked like they're asleep. Maybe they weren't asleep, but if you feel like nobody's paying attention to you, you're going to preach a whole lot different than if everybody is looking up at you. So when you wear your mask, sometimes and in many situations, you cut off your encouragement from the preacher, because sometimes simply your face paying attention is an encouragement. Sometimes your face showing that you are interested in what is being preached and what is being taught is a reward. I'm telling you, sometimes I get encouraged just looking at the faces of people. Sometimes I say something that is emotionally impactful, and I'll see people's faces, and I'm just so encouraged that they feel what I'm feeling, because what I'm feeling is coming from the Word of God. So I encourage you. When you up there listening let's think of it this way. When you go to a restaurant, you take your mask off because you're eating your food. When you at the church and you hear the sermon, maybe you want to wear a mask when you walking down the aisle. Okay, fine. But when you hearing the word, take your mask off because you're eating. You're eating the word, and we need to see your face. There's a crisis of confidence because pastors don't want to address issues, right? Present day issues. And what they'll do is they'll try to talk around it and play both sides. I've seen this a lot. There's this idea that pastors shouldn't talk too much about political things or present day issues because they'll be getting outside the Word of God when they do that. I get it to a point, right? If I turn a sermon around and then try to make it about whether you should support the latest school referendum, that will be wrong. But I do think that there are some issues that are going on in the modern world that need to be talked about, and some sermons track right into that. Think of it this way. I'm teaching on Timothy, and all of a sudden I come to the passage about the church being the pillar and foundation of the truth. How can I not therefore go into all the lies that are being taught through society and how the church should stand up against them? If I don't do that, I've missed an opportunity. And preaching should preach from the word, but the word preaches to the culture. There should be a conflict. There should be a battle between the word and the culture constantly. Just like Paul said, man, the Cretans are gluttons and evil creatures. Rebuke them sharply. He was talking to the culture, right? Sometimes we have to preach the word to our cultures. I think about what the preacher in Ecclesiastes, and when you talk about the word a preacher, what it literally meant is a person who brings ideas and people together. A sermon is nothing if it is simply just an explanation of a word. If you want to do that, you should go to college and hear a dry professor talk about it. The reason that people don't like hearing a dry professor is because he doesn't bring the word to relevance. It is your job as a pastor to bring the word to relevance. And it is your job as a people to accept that relevance. Not resist it, accept it. And when your pastor says something bold about today, to encourage him. Because sometimes he feels like he's going out on a limb. Like he's walking with 1 foot off the cliff and 1 foot on the cliff when he goes there. And you got to encourage him. Because even if he may seem bold, he's going to need you backing him up, because it's a battle. Sometimes when you preach something that you know some people resist, you feel that resistance when you're up there. The last reason that there's a crisis of confidence in the church is lots of pastors preach the New Testament only. This one is going to be a little bit more difficult to explain, but let me say it like this. New Testament, especially Pauline epistles, and this is not an absolute, but I'll just generalize. Pauline epistles are what most pastors want to preach. Why? Because they can go to their theology right away. A lot of pastors love theology because they're little knowledge gifts, right? They're knowledge gifts. And I could talk about gifts in another video. But ultimately, the class of pastor is overpopulated by people who love knowledge. And this is a problem. But we can talk about that in another video. But because they love knowledge, they love these books because they kind of feel like they want to be mini Pauls, right? And when they hear the theology and they go off on tangents talking about the sovereignty of God and just different theories that they have, and they love to use the words epistemology and things like that, that loses the congregation every time they say that word. And what they do is they preach one part of the Bible, and sometimes they preach it badly because they love the theology so much, right? They'll teach a passage in James, or James will talk about faith and works, and they'll talk the whole sermon about what James is not saying. So sometimes they teach it badly, but they focus so much on the New Testament that they miss some of the beauty of the Old Testament. And what do we miss when we don't teach the Old Testament? We miss the culture, right? We miss the understanding of daily life and how life should be lived and shouldn't be lived. We miss seeing how prophets talk directly to God, right? We miss a preaching to a culture that is in sin and rebuking that culture itself. We miss the direct rebuke. We miss the intensity. We miss the immediacy of God's judgment on some of his people. We miss the idea that God could be amongst people and people still turn their back. We miss some of those ideas because those are stark and very relevant in the Old Testament. And sometimes it's harder to find them in the New Testament. I'm not saying they're not there, but sometimes you can avoid that. And I think that's for a purpose. A lot of those Joel Osteens, and I'll talk about him later, but a lot of these pastors, they'll talk about stuff. And when they talk about theology, they do that to avoid the bold, stark issues that a passage will address. And they convolute it with all these words that mean nothing. They might as well be speaking in tongues, because when they speak, the culture doesn't get it. I had a pastor that came to some conference that's preached a sermon, and a lot of these pastors who was at the conference was loving what he was saying, and I hated it. And the reason I hated it is because, first of all, he was so dry. Secondly, his subject was so boring and irrelevant to what we were dealing with as a people. And I don't want to get into what he was talking about, because people who watching the video is going to be so blatant who I'm talking about that it's going to hurt somebody's feeling. But it was so bad. It was so focused on this theology and this depth that it had no connection to anybody's daily life. Nobody went back home on Monday after that Sunday and lived any differently, learning what they learned, what he taught. It was really hard to even do that. Like, you could have tried hard to do it. And some of these pastors and some people was just, they were so holy, they don't have no critical bones in their body. So they were literally saying, yeah, I got something out of it. Bro, it was garbage, right? But nobody wanted to say that. So some of you pastors, right, you get so deep in the weeds. You think you getting so spiritual, you're losing people. On the other hand, you got some people who think they so spiritual that they getting something out of that stuff. Ah, man, it bothers me. So here's the thing. Teach the Old Testament. Teach the New Testament. Teach the whole Bible, right? Teach Revelations. I don't care if you're scared of the book. Preach it, because our faith is formed by the word, and our faith that is only formed by part of the word will be incomplete. And we will miss things. It is one thing to teach about the sovereignty of God from Romans chapter 9 and 10, and quite another to teach it in the life of Joseph, who was sold into slavery by his brothers on purpose by the plan of God. It's just two different things. And I know it doesn't seem like it, but there's a different kind of relevance, and it hits the audience different. That's why both are included. And you might say they're not two different things. They're the same subject. They are different because God wouldn't include both stories if both were not needed. And since both are needed, both should be preached. So it is absolutely necessary that you teach the whole counsel of God. And don't get on these things where you just teach just the New Testament for a whole year. I don't even know if you should be teaching alternating Old Testament and New Testament, because if you look at all the books of the Bible, it's more old than new. I'm going long. But there's a crisis of confidence in our pastors. And you can help them by encouraging them. And pastors, you can help them by being relevant, being confident, being bold, emphasizing the war leader type leadership. by telling your people to stop being so afraid of a virus and to speak to current issues. And you'll be helping everybody, and you'll be helping the whole church of God.